My name's Pete Comstock, and I put on a couple of these presentations for NISA before. And tonight I'm going to show you what I do to catch lake trout and also how you can profit from it and make money. First, a little bit about myself. I've been fishing this lake now for 37 years. I'm a summertime resident up here. I live down in Moscow during the winter. And I stay at the Jeb and Margaret Trailer Haven that's right at the mouth of Trussell Creek. And when I first started coming up here 37 years ago, we were primarily fishing for the dollies or the bull trout. And back then you could harvest them. The limit was 4. And then they brought the limit down to 2 and then 1, and they put them on the endangered species list, and you couldn't harvest them anymore. So I thought, well, I better, now change gears and start fishing for kokanee. Well, a few years later, they shut the kokanee down because the population was endangered and on the verge of collapse. So in order to stay up here and enjoy the fishing that I like to do up here, I learned how to catch lake trout. Lake trout are also called Mackinaw. And so when you hear me talking about lake trout or Mackinaw, I'm talking about the same fish. It seems like every fish on this lake has 2 names. You have lake trout, Mackinaw, kamloops or rainbow, kokanee or blueback. Pike minnows are also squawfish, bull trout or dollies, pea mouse or pinots. But the Jeb and Margaret Trailer Court where I'm at, it's about 60% Canadian. And I was talking to one of the Canadian fishermen, and he dropped a new one on me. And I don't speak fluent Canadian, but he started mentioning pickerel. And I thought, what is a pickerel? And he says, yeah, there's pickerel in this lake. Anybody here know what a pickerel is?
Great Northern Pike.
That's correct, but actually not the right answer. Anyway, because of your answer, you get a participation award. A pickerel technically is a species of pike that's over on the East Coast, but not around here. Well, the Canadians call the walleye pickerel. And I've never heard them called that before. So that's another new one on me, that if you hear somebody fishing for pickerel, that's Canadian for walleye. Now there's 4 different ways that I fish for lake trout. And I'll go through each way separately. The first one is dragging plugs on the bottom. The second is trolling with dodgers at or near the bottom. Now these 2 methods of fishing, how you fish for them is you have to stay at a certain depth. And so when you find a contour, you have to stay at that depth and follow that contour. Pretty tough to do on this lake because of the steep sides and everything, but I'm going to show you a lot of places that you can easily fish the contour. The third way that I've fished for them is a vertical jigging. And we used to do really good on the vertical jigging, caught a lot of big fish fairly consistently. Then when they started netting them, there have been few and far between, and we've been catching smaller and smaller ones. And the fourth way is just trolling suspended in open water. The 2 lures I like for dragging plugs on the bottom, they're both made by the Yakima Bait Company. The first one is the size U20 flatfish. And then I also like fishing the mag lips. Now when you're fishing this way, there's advantages and disadvantages. First of all, you're right on the bottom, right where the fish are at. The disadvantage is you're also right on the bottom where all the debris and snags are at. And when you fish this way, you lose a lot of lures. There's 2 different types of fishermen that fish this way, those that have lost lures and those who are going to lose lures. Now the setup I like using, starting at the lure, it's attached to the leader with a snap. I go about 5 or 6 feet of mono leader, and then it goes into a snap and swivel. From there, it goes into 60 feet of leaded line. And then the leaded line is attached to monofilament line, is what's up in the reel, and the reel's loaded with that. And I use a nail knot to attach those 2 lines. You want to put the downrigger clip on the monofilament line, not the leaded line. If you put it in the leaded line, it releases really hard. And also leaded line, when you snap, it has a tendency to break. Keep the downrigger ball, I like to keep it about 10 feet off the bottom. The leaded line will bring it down the rest of the way. And I use anywhere from 12 to 20 pound test. That's what that nail knot looks like. And There's a lot of different ways to tie the nail knot, but when you tie it with the leaded line, what I like to do is strip out about 4 or 5 inches of the lead. The lead doesn't offer any strength to it at all, so it's just the cloth portion. Tie an overhand knot on it, and then like I said, there's several different ways to tie the nail knot. But once you tie it like this, get it on there, you cinch it down a little bit and then slide it down on top of that knot, and then tighten it down all the way and then snip off the tags. The most important part is that itty bitty little overhand knot that you tie, otherwise the monofilament line will slide right off the leaded line. We'll talk about the flatfish a little bit. I like trolling the flatfish at about 0.8 to 1 knot, which is about 1 mile per hour to 1.2 miles per hour. Now these flatfish, they need to be tuned. And what that means is if you put them in the water and they start going to one side or the other, you have to look at them and you have to make sure that the tail ring, the belly ring, and the nose ring is all straight. If it's still going to one side a little bit, it's easy to fix. The side that you want it to come back to, you just take a pair of needle nose and just tweak that nose ring a little bit towards the side that you want it to run. Now these flatfish, they have sort of a serpentine action, and that's why they like the slow speed. If you run them too fast, then they're a little bit too erratic and they might ride up to one side or another. This particular color of a flatfish is probably one of my favorite. I've used this one for years and years. It's been real successful. This flatfish here, the perch tiger, it's more of a metallic color, and I like using the metallic colors when the water starts to clear up. This particular flatfish in this color won the Ross Millikan Derby last year. This flatfish here, black silver flake. Now this color combination, most fishermen know it as a different name. Anybody know what that is? The Michael Jackson. You and another lure. Another participation award. Yeah, they call this one the Michael Jackson, but because of the woke culture, and it's not politically correct to call it a Michael Jackson. So when you look on the label, it usually says black silver flake, and it doesn't say Michael Jackson on it. This one here has been a very successful one for me. It's just like the Michael Jackson, but with a white stripe, and it's called Skunk. Metallic blue silver, that's another good one when the water's really clear, like later in the season, August, September. So those are the flatfish I like using. The mag lips I like using. I like them in the size 3.5. And you control those a little bit faster, about 1.4 to 1.6 knots. Now these lures don't need to be tuned. They don't have the rings on them. They're mounted solid, and they have a more of an erratic action. And sometimes that's what the mags like. Sometimes they like the serpentine action. Now this here has also been a good color for me for walleye, this rusty crawdad. This one here has been an excellent one for me. Metallic perch, again when the water's clear. Metallic silver blue, another Michael Jackson, and probably my all-time favorite, it's called Night Dancer. Now there's good news and bad news with the Night Dancer. The bad news is they don't make them anymore. The good news is you can make your own, and I make a lot of my own. They're very tough to find. Every once in a while you might find one in a sporting goods store that's been on the shelf for a long time, but if you can find one of those Night Dancers, I go ahead and snarf it up. Now when I make these, they're easy to make. Get yourself your Michael Jackson, a couple of cans of paint, Krylon or Rust-Oleum, a couple cheap paint brushes or Q-tips, and 2 cans of beer. Welcome to my art studio. You guys ever, need to get just a little bit of paint, you need a little dish, or you mix some epoxy or JB Weld, you don't have anything to mix it in. The little cup in these beverage cans work perfect for mixing things like that. And now I have done a lot of research on this, and I continue to do the research to see if it makes any difference. But I've determined that the brand of beer doesn't make any difference when you paint these things up. Like I said before, you pick up a lot of debris, and a lot of times that's what you come up with. When I fish, I have the Reactor 40 on my boat, so it follows a specific course, and I have these courses already programmed in. Seems like later on in the year I pick up less and less debris. I think it's because I kind of plowed a trail through there, got all the debris up off the bottom. But sometimes you can troll for a half hour. You got to bring them up, check them every once in a while. There's sometimes I'll troll for a half hour, 40 minutes. I bring them up and they're clean. or I might bring them up 5 minutes later and they're full of debris. You just don't know. So fishing this way, it's kind of a pain. You got to bring them up and check them every once in a while for the debris, because when they're like this, they just won't fish. And not only debris, sometimes you get a surprise. And this is the third net I've caught now since I've been fishing for lake trout. And that was a good one there. That net sells for $109 in the North 40. It's one of those with the extendable handles. I cleaned it up. It's good as new. What I don't like about it, though, it's pretty heavy. And so when you're reaching way out to try to net a fish, the leverage on your wrist is kind of bad. I think that's probably where the guy lost it. And you tend to bring up a lot of debris off the bottom, too. This one particular snag, I lost a couple lures on it. And then I was able to bring up all this leaded line in these lures here. Now the story behind this lure here, you can see it's hand painted. Well, I belong to the Lake Pend Oreille Idaho Club, and at the monthly meeting, everybody brings a lure. And you auction it off, and it's to support a scholarship program that they have. So one of the guys I know, Marlon Peel, he painted that up and brought it in. They auctioned it off, and a guy named Dale Green bought it and fished with it, and boy, it started catching fish like crazy. And one day he went out, he caught 9 max, 7 of them was on that lure, and then he lost it. And so when I drug up all these lures and all that leaded line, I ended up with his special lure. And he knows I have it, but I'm holding it for ransom right now. Another gentleman posted this on the internet, a gentleman named Glenn Owsley. Anyway, he brought this mess up here, and you could see all of the night dancers that are painted up that I had lost. There was a snag out there that I avoided for years and years, and all of a sudden I started losing one lure after another after another. And so I actually had to change my course to get around that. So a couple weeks later, I see this on Facebook, and I recognize most of these lures. The rusty crawdad, the night dancers. So he's probably not here tonight thinking I want my lures back. This here is just kind of an example. Some of the fish that I've caught with the trolling the plugs on the bottom. This year was about a month ago, some last year. Now this is my gal friend, Georgia. She loves to fish. And she dresses up, I guess, to go fishing. She belongs to a LuLaRoe club. Anybody here know what LuLaRoe is? It's kind of a clothing group. And they have this group, and they get online 2 or 3 times a week. And she is like a clothes hoarder. Every closet, every drawer is filled with LuLaRoe. She can wear a different outfit each day and never wear the same outfit twice for the rest of her life. And I give her a bad time about it. And I start in, and then she starts to remind me about my tackle boxes, my lures, my fishing poles, and everything else, and shuts me down pretty quick. The second way I like to fish, and this is how I catch probably most of my fish, with the Dodger setup. Now Dodgers come in different sizes, different colors. I go about 18 to 24 inches on the leader, which is about 2 to 2.5 times the length of the Dodger. From the Dodger, I only go about 10 to 15 feet behind the downrigger ball. And I keep the downrigger ball, try to keep it about 5 feet off the bottom, and then maintain that depth. Question?
So, I know you're following contours using one of the cannons that bottom track.
Yeah, just following the contour. It's contours that I've been fishing for years and years and have programmed in. You're talking about the Canon Digitrolls?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not rich enough to buy those, and a friend of mine, Ron Sharp, who does quite a bit of guiding, he's had nothing but trouble with them. So they're great when they work, but when they don't work, they're just a real pain. The Dodgers I like to troll about 1.4 to 1.6 knots, the same speed as the mag lips. This here is a good color, half chrome, half copper, half brass. This color here works really good in murky water or off-colored water. Again, I use straight monofilament line. Try to stay about 5 feet off the bottom and about 10 to 15 feet behind the ball. Now these have a side-to-side action. Well, first of all, they come in 3 different sizes. The double-aught size, which is the smaller ones, and then the next size up, the 8-inch size, and then the 9-inch size of the size 1. I fish almost exclusively with the double-aught, with the smaller ones, the 6-inch ones. What's nice about fishing this way, because you're 5 feet off the bottom, you're not dragging through all the debris. You catch very little snags and very little debris. You can color them up with different lure tape. All the sporting goods stores sell this stuff. Sometimes if you just have a straight silver one and you want to put, half brass color, or if you just have a plain one, you want to put some fish scale on it, you can put this lure tape on it. They sell it at Superfly and just about all the other sporting goods stores. The different things that you can put on these is you can use like a little Rapala, different spoons, or like a fly or a streamer, like a Frisky Jenny. These are some of the spoons that I like. The spoon really doesn't matter. I just like using a small spoon, about 2-3 inches long, a light spoon that flutters quite a bit. There's several different makes of them: Coyotes, Crocodiles, Swedish Pimple, Thomas Boyance, Gold Star, Little Cleo. They all work. A lot of times you'll buy them, it'll just be a single hook. I usually trade out and put a treble hook on them. All these have been good spoons for me. This particular one here, I cut out a little bit of glow tape and stuck it on there, and it's been probably one of my best producers. But many years ago, I thought I'd try using mini squids. They started working really good for me. I'll still use spoons sometimes, but I like going to the mini squid, and this is how I used to tie them years ago. One evening I was in the boat cleaning it up, and I was going through a little dish that I had a whole bunch of assorted tackle in it, and I came across some of these little spinning glows, and I thought, I wonder how those would work. So I put a spinning glow on one. I went out the next day and fished with them. And this was before they were netting them, and we were in a place out by Bottle Bay. There was a whole bunch of us boats out there fishing together, and I started catching one fish after another after another. I'd have one on, I'd reel it up before I get it in. The other pole had one on. I'd net the first one. It'd get tangled up in the net. I always fish with 2 nets. The second one, I'd come in, I'd net it, get the first one untangled. I'd let it down before I even got the other one out. I had a fish on the first one and was back and forth like that for the rest of the morning. I ended up with 36 lake trout that day. But then I decided to try one new thing. About then, smile blades came out. And I thought, well, I'd give those a try. And this is my smile blade setup. I like using the number 4 hook. The beads I have here is just to fill up the space between the hook and the mini squid. I use actually double up on the mini squids. I have a glow mini squid that's inserted into the other mini squid, and I like using the ultraviolet colors. A couple of beads for ball bearings. This line here is about 18 to 24 inches, or about 2 to 2.5 times the length of the Dodger. The smile blades you can get just about any sporting goods store. I like using the little 1-inch ones, and this particular one here actually glows in the dark. And the name of that one is Glow Burst, and that's been probably one of my favorites. Well, Mona at Superfly, she makes her own smile blades, and they're a little bit different. They're kind of like a propeller. They work good too. And I told her about the Glow Burst, and she's picked up some of that material. She said she's going to start making some of those. This is my typical setup. One day I was fishing out there, the place that I mentioned off of Bottle Bay. I was using identical setups, so I thought, and one setup started catching fish and the other one didn't. And when the one setup caught 7 fish to the other one not catching any, I thought there's something wrong. So I went ahead and reeled it up, and the one had a bunch of grass around the bearings. And that grass and that weed was actually sucked up through the hole of the smile blade. That one was not catching fish. Sometimes it's the little things make a big difference. So I went ahead and cleaned it up and kept fishing with it, and that's what I ended up with that morning. Now sometimes the maglip setup works best for me, and other times the Dodger mini squid works for me. Well, I had a friend from high school, hadn't seen him for over 50 years, and he looked me up and he says, hey, I want to go fishing on Lake Pend Oreille. So I invited him out, and the day before I did really, really good on the maglips, and so that's what I put out. And we fished for a couple of hours without a bite. And I thought, well, because we're trolling the same speed as the Dodger mini squid setup, let's go ahead and put one of those out. And it caught a fish, and another fish, and another fish. Well, that's what you call a clue. So I went ahead and put the Dodger mini squid out on the other one, and we just started catching fish. And that's what we ended up with that morning. I'm going to start talking about some of the areas that I like to fish where you can hold a contour pretty good. One area is called the Shelf. A lot of people have heard of the Shelf, and it's an area that sits between Pearl Island and Mamaluce Island. I like fishing about a 75-foot profile. It's pretty easy to hold. You come out here, you find 75 feet, and then you just follow that contour out. This end, it's pretty easy to follow because it's kind of a gradual drop-off. You get at this end, it's harder to follow because it's quite a bit steeper. So I usually come off about the tip of Mamaluce, turn around, and come back. Now when I say 75 feet, I mean 75-foot contour, 75-foot deep water at full pool. Right now the water's down about 2.5, 3 feet. So now when I fish it, I'll fish 72 feet of water just to compensate for the drop of the lake. Now a good way to find that 75 foot out there is if you look to the north and you got these mountains here and the real jagged peaks here in the Selkirks. Anybody know the name of those peaks? Who said Seven Sisters? Who said it first? I line up the Seven Sisters with Pearl Island, and when the tip of the Seven Sisters are just over the top of Pearl Island, you'll be in 75 feet of water. Now you don't keep them lined up, that's just a good starting point. So when you get out there, you're in 75 feet of water, then it's your job to maintain that contour. Years ago, before I had a GPS and plot charters and that sort of thing, that's how I'd find my 75 foot. So I'd run out there, I'd line it up just like that, and then follow the contour around. Now for the bad news. There's a snag out there that sits right about here, and it's in 77 feet of water at full pool, so right now it's probably in about 75 feet of water. So don't go out there and think, well, Pete said fish it in 75 feet of water. Well, now that the water is low, you'll hit that snag. It takes everything. It'll take your lure, your line, your downrigger cable, your downrigger ball. I've even heard of a downrigger being tore out of the mounts and is sitting at the bottom of the lake. You really have to avoid that snag. I've had people say, because I've done quite a bit of scuba diving, they say, well, why don't you dive on that thing? And it's like, so what am I going to do when I find it? There's so much stuff down there to get tangled up in, I figured just leave it alone. Now these are the GPS coordinates of that snag. So if you want to take a snapshot of that, put it in your chart plotter, avoid it. Yeah, it will take everything. A friend of mine sent a camera down there. He was lucky to get the camera back, and he figured it was probably a bull pine. It's about 30 feet long, branches go out about 20 feet, and it comes up about 20 feet up off the bottom. Now when you program these GPS coordinates in your chart plotter, I recommend that you set your chart plotter for the position format in degrees and decimal to degrees. And when you get on your chart plotter, this is the setting you want to have it on, is degrees and decimal to degrees. The other way is more confusing. If you had it set degrees, minutes, and decimal minutes, that's a little bit harder to program into your chart plotter. In the same way, the other way is degrees, minutes, seconds, and decimal to seconds. So when I go ahead and relay GPS coordinates to somebody, it's a lot easier when I just set it for degrees and decimal to degrees. And that's important, and later on in my presentation I'll explain why that's important. It's a lot easier to find it this way than, than fishing over the top of it. Yeah, a lot cheaper. This is kind of an example of what we catch out there. This was last year. We were fishing primarily the dodgers and mini squids, and that was out there on the shelf. The problem with the shelf, you go out there and it's usually pretty windy till about 10 o'clock in the morning. The wind that comes out of Cabinet Gorge and the Clark Fork River, it's pretty choppy out there. So when I go out there and I find that it's pretty windy and I want it to settle down, this is one of my other go-to places. If you recognize it, you got Warren Island here, East Hope, and Hope Point. Well, there's a trough that sits in here, and if you can get in there and follow the contour, I usually start at about 85 feet and follow the contour around. Sometimes I'll pick 95 feet if I can't find them at 85 feet. If you get on the 75-foot contour, it brings you pretty far up into Ellisport Bay and kind of right off Holiday Shores Marina. I usually don't like fishing this because I catch a lot of bull trout when I come in pretty tight. It's kind of confusing if you can get on the depth and maintain that contour, but as you come out and if it starts to shallow up, your tendency is to go out towards the lake. It actually gets shallower this direction. And so if you go a little bit more towards shore, it'll get deep because you got this deep bowl in here. Catch a lot of fish in there. And the problem is in the summer and on weekends, the wakeboarders, the tubers, the water skiers, they just have no mercy to fishermen, and they just zip all around through here. And so usually by then when they come out, then the shelf is usually settled down enough that I could go on out in the shelf and hopefully be left alone by all the toy boats. This is what that contour looks like. So you can kind of see, you can get on one of these contour lines and just follow them around. Pick your depth, fish through there, and just keep going back and forth. One of the guys in the trailer park a few years ago, he was the type of guy that had a real nice boat, all kinds of tackle. We get on YouTube, read all sorts of articles about fishing, but then didn't have the confidence to go out and fish. And the guy's name was Richie. Unfortunately, now he's in assisted living. He's no longer on the lake. So I took pity on him, and I said, Richie, come on out and go fishing with me. So I took him out in that area off of Ellisport Bay, and I started showing him the setup. Well, he brings out a pen and a notebook. He's going to copy all this stuff down. So I show him the setup that I use, and says, okay, well, this is the Dodger that I like, and this is the mini squid setup that I like. And he goes, how long is that leader? I go, 18 to 24 feet, 24 inches. Well, what's better, 18 or 24 inches? I says, it doesn't really matter, about 2.5 times the length of the Dodger. I says, then I clip it into the downrigger release and lower it down. Well, how far back do you put it? I says, 10 to 15 feet. Well, is it shorter or further out better? I said, it really doesn't make any difference. He says, then I go ahead and drop it down. I like to stay, 3 to 7 feet off the bottom. Well, is 3 feet better or 7 feet better? He's writing all this stuff down. And I said, well, then I like to troll about 1.4 to 1.6 knots. What's that in miles per hour? About 1.5 to 1.8. Well, what's better, faster or slower? And I said, well, Rich, it really doesn't make any difference. And we started catching fish, one after another. He just excited as can be. He calls a friend of his and he says, hey, I'm out fishing with Pete. Man, we're catching fish. He goes, I figure out what we're doing wrong. He says, we're overthinking this stuff. So don't overthink it. That's what we ended up with that day. When you're out in that area, this is the area that I just showed you. Well, if you go from the tip of Warren Island, Cottage Island, Hope Point, there's a plateau out here that's very easy to fish and very easy to hold that contour. And it takes about an hour to troll this circle. And it's a consistent 72 to 75 feet. So if you need an easy place to fish, I would suggest you use your Dodger mini squid setup and start fishing out here. You can see how the contour is in here, how flat it is. This is one of my favorite places to fish. It's off Bottle Bay. You have Sunnyside here and Bottle Bay in here, your Bottle Bay Point. This contour is very easy to hold. And I usually start out about an 85-foot contour, and you could actually start all the way back by Hawkins Point and troll all along here and maintain an 85-foot depth. But this is usually the path that I take. And you troll this direction, and then you start getting towards the castle. Everybody know where that castle's at? You start getting towards that castle, and there's a real deep trough that goes through here. And so you actually have to adjust your course and go to the right a little bit and try to avoid this deep trough. You get in that deep trough, and that's what you're going to see on your graph. You can get all excited and say, man, that's loaded with fish. A lot of fishermen waste a lot of time trolling through that. Those are all whitefish. You're not going to bite the stuff that you're fishing with for Mackinaw. That trough will go all the way back to Anderson Point, and it's just loaded with whitefish. Very easy place to fish, hardly any snags. You use the Dodger mini squid setup, and you'll do pretty good in there. Again, about 1.4 to 1.6 knots. This is how the contour lays in there. You can see it'd be very easy to follow one of those contour lines around, and you can see how it deepens up in here. You stay out of this deep trough, stay out of the whitefish, and you'll catch quite a few fish in there. That was the area that I caught 36 fish one day. In Georgia, again, another one of our LuLaRoe outfits. Another area I don't fish very often, but is pretty productive, is Martin Bay, and troll towards Picard Point. Another pretty easy contour to follow. Garfield Bay. You get in there, you pick a depth, you stay at that depth, and you can follow the contour around pretty easily. Now, as I'm trolling along, my sonar is focused in on only about the top 15 feet from the bottom, or the bottom 15 feet. And when I see Mackinaw on the screen, they look like this. This is my downrigger ball, always in the cone of the transducer. And so when I find Mackinaw, they're usually looking like this. And again, I'm looking at about the bottom 15 feet. What's frustrating is you see this. This is a Mackinaw that's come along, and he's following my downrigger ball, and following it, and sometimes 200 to 300 yards he'll follow that downrigger ball. They're not scared of it, they're just curious. I wish they'd be more curious with my lure than the downrigger ball. Downrigger balls I use are the fish-shaped ones. I use those because I have the mold for those, and so I could make a whole bunch of them. It doesn't cost me anything. And I call it my fish decoy because they like to follow that thing. And there's 2 of them that just got on the downrigger ball and followed it. Some of the fish here that we've caught trolling, primarily that was dragging the plugs on the bottom. My son and granddaughter and his wife. My granddaughter, she loves to fish. She's been fishing since just a toddler. She caught her first fish with me. She's grown up. I've just grown fatter. And that was one day earlier this year. Pretty slow fishing, but they had a contest going for the first, the biggest, and the most. And my granddaughter won. Let's talk about ways to make money catching lake trout. If you're a member of the Lake Pend Oreille, Idaho Club, they have a monthly contest called Mack of the Month. And so the person that catches within the club that catches the biggest Mackinaw, you bring it into Holiday Shores or one of the other places that'll weigh it for you. They'll fill out a weight slip, and if your weight slip is the biggest Mack of that month, you get $100. When you get your weight slip, you have to have it in by the 10th of the following month. There's been people that have sometimes entitled to Mack of the Month. They had their weight slip, they forgot to turn it in. They lost out. I usually get Mack of the Month sometimes 2-3 times a year. This is previous year here, some of the Mack of the Months that I caught. And this year I was in line for Mack of the Month in July, and then a guy named Brad Sturgis bumped me out of it. Brad Sturgis is the Mackinaw king out here on this lake. He catches a lot of big Macks, both him and his wife Becky. Never met the man, but I sure know a lot about him. So he bumped me in July. In August, I had Mack of the Month, all the way up to August 31st. And I'll be darned if I didn't get bumped out of Mack of the Month by this lady here. We're still speaking. And then 2-3 days later, September, she catches that one. And she was on the board for Mack of the Month until the Derby we recently had, and somebody caught a bigger one. So, nope, she loves to fish. Few success stories here. My nephew, Corey, he wanted to learn how to fish the shelf. Well, the boat he has, he didn't have a gas trolling motor, he didn't have a kicker, but he had the electric trolling motor, the Tarova, and it will follow a track. And he also has a spot lock on it where you hit a button and it just holds you right where it's at. And he wanted to learn the shelf, so he went out one day and he followed me through my route and programmed that into his electric trolling motor, and brought his 2 kids out. And they only had about 5 hours on the battery. And this is how they did that day. Of course, the youngest son say, "Look, that's my fish." That was another day that Corey went out. Here's a success story here. Marlin Peel. I took Marlin out fishing. I wanted to take him out on the shelf, but it was pretty rough, so we fished there in that Ellisport Bay. Caught a few small fish, that settled down, went out on the shelf, and caught a couple of bigger ones. And so he really took note. Just a couple weeks later was the Ross Milliken Derby. And look right here. He placed in that derby. Now, I have never fished a derby in my life, and Georgia and I decided to enter this derby, and I'll be darned if we didn't take first and second place. So now every year she insists we fish that derby. So then fast forward the next year, which is last year. Look who wins the derby. Now this is an interesting derby because 5th place through 9th place pays $100. If you get 10th place, it's $250. So if you're not at the top, you want to get pushed down to the bottom. I was in 9th place until 7 minutes to the end of the derby. And Marlin hooks the derby winner. Had 7 minutes left. He comes flying into Holiday Shores of the weight station. That fish was still in the net laying on the bottom of the floor, and Marlin was just shaking. So I helped him get the fish out. So he got first place with 7 minutes to spare, and thankfully he pushed me down to 10th place, so I got a better payoff. And there's Marlin's derby winner. In September, during the derby, for some reason the fish really aren't that big. This year, again, marlin placed 5th place, Georgia in 7th place, and I was in 8th place. I call us the Trailer Haven Trio. But this is one way to make money too, is enter some of those derbies. I mean, it's almost embarrassing that my fish that placed was 1.85 pounds. I went out 2 days later, fished the same area, and I was catching 6 and 7 pound max. I just can't figure it out. I want to talk a little bit about jig fishing. This is the 3rd way that I enjoy fishing, and it used to be my the funnest way to catch them. But then when they started netting the fish, they seemed to get smaller and fewer and far between. I use different types of jigs. This one here is called a mega bait, and it's a 2.5 ounces. Now when you jig, first you have to find the fish. You got to get over them. You have to be able to stay on them, and then jig for them. And when I fish these leaded jigs, the mega baits, when you jig for them, you got to bring it way up and then let it flutter down. So you just can't pull it up and then follow it down. You got to lift up and then let it flutter down. And the first time I started jig fishing, I felt like I was snipe hunting. It just wasn't working. But when you jig up and then let it flutter down, I like using braided line for that, because sometimes you're fishing, 100, 110 feet down. If you have monofilament line, there's going to be a lot of stretch and you can't feel the bite. But when you jig up and let it flutter down, if there's any breeze, your braided line tends to get wrapped around your guides. And that's about the time that one's going to hit. You're going to try to set the hook, and your line's going to be all tangled up in your guides. Years ago, Cabela's came out with these fishing poles here. You notice there's no guides on them. It's because the line goes inside the blank here and comes out the tip. Real stiff rod, and so when I fish with these lead jigs like this to let them flutter down, this is a good rod to have. I can't find them anymore. It's called an interflow rod. I think there's still some on the market, but they're expensive. Cabela's is selling them for like $60, $70 a piece, and after they stopped making them, I still have 4 of them. So if you can find an interflow rod, I would use that if you're going to be using these lead jigs like this. Mega Bait makes them. These are all good colors here. I don't know if you pronounce that P-line or pline, but they also make a real good lead jig too. And Superfly carries these. And when you jig for them, I jig all the way up, and then when my rod tip hits, I like the jig to hit the bottom with my rod tip just about 6 inches from the water. And I jig it up and let it flutter down. And all of a sudden you'll jig up and it flutters down, and all of a sudden your line's slack about 4 feet from where it should be. Well, these Macs, you really don't feel them hit. They usually hit it as the jig's fluttering down, and they pick it up coming up. And so when it starts to flutter down, you think, what's all this slack here? That's when you set the hook. And boy, they fight good when you hook them with the jigs. Some more of the jigs that I like, Lure Jensen, the cripple herring. Usually I take off the single hook and put on treble hooks. You could also use plastics, tube jigs like this, baits like this. Now what's nice when you use these, you don't have to jig way up and follow it down. You kind of finesse the rod. You jig it up a little bit and just kind of tease them. And that's usually when they hit those, you usually feel the bite if you have the braided line on. Deer hair jigs like this also work really good for jigging. And it used to be my favorite way to fish. We go out and we catch a bunch of them. And big ones, 18, 20, 22 pounds. And then after they started netting them, I think this year I've only caught 6 fish jigging. And I put in hours and hours and hours for them. Now when you're jigging, like I said, you have to find where they're at. And there's different structures that they like. Wrote down here, underwater plateaus next to drop-offs, underwater ridges, underwater mounds and humps. And I got to looking at that, I thought, how stupid is that? Of course it's underwater. That's where the fish are at. But like on an underwater plateau, you'll have a flat area that suddenly drops down into a deep trough. They like sitting right on the lips like this. Underwater ridges, I'll find different points and ridges that are underwater, and I'll zigzag back and forth across those ridges. And I might start at 70 feet, then come out to 80 feet, then 90 feet, and then all of a sudden I'll find what depth they're at and what depth they like. So I'll go over it, and say the tip of this was 90 feet, well, I go past it and then I follow my track back and wait for it to come up to 90 feet, and then that's where I stop. And on my boat, I have the Ulterra electric trolling motor, and it has the spot lock on it. I hit a button and it holds me exactly over the top of them, and I could go ahead and jig them. This area here, believe it or not, between Sheepherder Point and the mouth of the river, all this structure that I'm talking about, you could find all that kind of structure through here. This is a nice flat area, very irregular bottom here, and I've caught a lot of fish jigging just finding the right structure through here. There's an area down by Whiskey Bay, Whiskey Rock, and there's an underwater hump there, and these are the coordinates, and this is what that screwy structure looks like. It'll come up to about 42 feet and then just drop off back into the lake. A lot of people like jigging off this area here. I usually don't fish that because it's pretty far south for me and it burns up a lot of gas. But my nephew, he wanted to launch at Bayview, and he was wondering about fishing down there. So I gave him these GPS coordinates to program into his chart plotter. And he programmed those in, brought them right to Whiskey Rock, right to that hump. You either fish the top of it or along the side of it. And that was one fish he caught that day. And then he caught that one there. First time fishing Whiskey Rock, first time jig fishing. He's quite the fisherman. When I talk to him, I refer to him as the second best fisherman I know. These are some of the fish we've caught jig fishing. So it used to be my favorite way to fish, and after they started netting them, they've netted a lot of the big ones out of there, and it's a lot more work. Now the final way I like to fish is just trolling out in open water. And I have several different lures that I use. I don't do a lot of open water trolling, but sometimes what I'll do is I'll be fishing the shelf, and then I find my way over towards Sheepherder Point, and I think, well, I'm going to go more towards Lee's Point or Dead Man. And rather than go full bore with my big motor, I'll just put a bunch of stuff down and just slowly go across the lake and put different things down. This one particular lure, it's made by Bay de Noc, and it's also made by Swedish Pimple. And these lures have been really effective for me. It's called a Flutter Laker Taker. And I'll either troll them just by themselves, maybe go 50 feet behind the downrigger ball and put it down anywhere from 70 to 120 feet. Troll them about maybe 2 knots or about 2.5 miles per hour. And they've been pretty effective. I caught a lot of fish with them, just trolling them alone, or you put them behind a dodger or a flasher. I've caught fish with them that way too. I've caught a lot of fish on the Lyman lures. Now these are the old Lyman lures. They used to make them out of wood, and you just can't find the wood ones anymore. Matter of fact, they're selling on eBay now for anywhere from, oh, I don't know, $50 to $90. And somebody was telling me, do you have any Lyman lures? And I said, you know, I think I got some in a tackle box. I went in the garage, pulled out an old tackle box, opened it up, and I had 40 of these Lyman lures sitting in it. I didn't even know that I had it. But trolling them about 2.5 miles per hour used to do really good. It says I would troll across the lake from about Sheepherder Point, come on over here by about, this is called Lee's Point here. You got the Long Beach here at Dead Man. And I would just try to, troll in about 120 feet, 130 feet of water. Try to stay somewhat close to the bottom. And back in the days before the netting, that's where we used to really catch some nice fish. Before the netting, this is typical of what we used to bring back to the trailer park. Fish cleaning station there, we just load up with Mackinaw. Well, those are some of the techniques that I use and some of the areas that I fish. I want to talk now about how you make money on these fish. Have y'all heard of the Angler Incentive Program? If you haven't, you can get online and just type in Lake Pend Oreille Angler Incentive Program, and they'll go ahead and they'll explain the program where they actually pay you to catch these fish and turn in the fish heads. It's $15 reward for each lake trout that you turn in. Now, if you catch a fish that is tagged, they use different tags out here. This one here is called an acoustic tag, and it's actually a radio transmitter about twice the size of your thumb. A lot of those have rewards on them. This here is called an anchor or spaghetti tag. You can see it visually on the side of the fish. And a lot of those have rewards on them. And they have them on lake trout, on bass, on walleye, on pike. Matter of fact, the acoustic tag and the spaghetti tag came out of the same fish. And I caught that one jigging. Unfortunately, neither one of them had a reward on it. So these are two of the type of tags that they have. Here's another tag that's used. It's called a PIT tag, P-I-T. Yeah, it's called a passive integrated transponder. They usually don't use that in this lake, but 10 weeks during the spring, I work with NOAA at the juvenile fish facility down at Lower Granite Dam on the Snake River, and we implant these in the outgoing juvenile fish. And we'll process well over 100,000 fish during the spring, and we put these PIT tags in them, monitor them going downstream, and then also coming back upstream. Now, where you turn the heads in, when you get on that website, they have a whole list of places where you turn in the heads. And some of the local ones here, you turn them in at a freezer, you drop them off in a freezer, you fill out a little form, put them in a plastic bag, you drop them in this freezer. That one there is at Holiday Shores. That one there is at the Conoco station in, was it Kootenai or Pend Oreille? They have one at North 40. Where these freezers are, they have like a little mailbox either attached to it or up on top. And they have the form that you fill out. And when you fill this form out, you have to separate the lake trout from the walleye. They don't want you to mix them. And they want you, if you caught them in a different month, they want them in separate bags. And so you fill this thing out, check it either lake trout or walleye, all of your information, the month that the fish were caught in, the number of fish at whatever location, and then you sign it and you date it. And it's important to know that when you sign this, that you're swearing, that you're attesting that you've read the rules of the Angler Incentive Program and you're abiding by them. I catch so many fish and have to fill out so many tags. What I do is I've already made up my own tags. And so I just have to fill in a little bit of information. And the bag they give you is just like a little sandwich bag. And when I turn in, 15 or 20 heads, it just doesn't fit. So I save all my bread bags throughout the year, and I fill those things up and drop my slip in. And about every couple weeks, the mail comes, there's your check. It will come from the Straight Arrow Tax and Accounting Company. Every couple of weeks, they mail it to you. That was a good month. So I started to run down just how much money I've made on the Angler Incentive Program since it's started. I started fishing Lake Pend Oreille in 1986, and that was 37 years ago. I began fishing for lake trout in 1992 after they shut off the bull trout and the kokanee fishing. So that was 31 years ago that I started fishing for lake trout. I average, and this is probably a very low average, about 250 fish a year, 250 fish a summer. So that's been probably 7,750 fish that I've caught of the Mackinaw. The Angler Incentive Program started in 2006, so that was 17 years ago. And so I calculated that out, and that's probably 4,200 fish that I've caught during the Angler Incentive Program. And that's probably close to $63,750 I made on the Angler Incentive Program. So somebody asked me earlier, do you have to pay taxes on this? Well, you turn in the fish heads, the envelope comes from the Straight Arrow Tax Service, and then come about January, here comes an envelope from the Straight Arrow Tax Service. And you think, oh my God, I got another check in the mail I didn't know about. Well, surprise. They send you a 1099, and yes, you have to pay taxes on this. And for that particular year, it was over $5,000 I had to pay taxes on. I'm going to change gears here a little bit. I've explained the different ways that you could make money on this Angler Incentive Program. Now I'm going to explain how you can lose money on the Angler Incentive Program. The whole purpose for the Angler Incentive Program is to reduce the number of lake trout that are highly predatory to the kokanee. The kokanee is the main food source for the bull trout that's a protective species. And the bull trout and the lake trout look a lot alike. So you definitely want to keep the lake trout. You have to release the bull trout. You do not want to turn in a bull trout head. The lake trout, you get $15 a piece for them. You turn in a bull trout head and it's a $250 fine. So you got to catch 17 lake trout to pay for the fine on the bull trout. I made this little diagram here and it explains the difference between the lake trout and the bull trout. Sometimes it's pretty easy to tell the difference. Sometimes it's not. The bull trout, the spots on them are usually round, and there's pink and orange spots in them that you can vaguely see here. The lake trout, the spotting on them is very irregular, and there's no pink spots in them. On the bull trout, this pattern here does not go up into the dorsal fin. On the lake trout, that pattern will extend up into the dorsal fin. The biggest indicator is on the bull trout, it's a slightly forked tail, and on the lake trout, it's a deep forked tail. So here you listen to me, you learn how to catch lake trout, you went out in some of the different areas that I've showed you, you catch a bunch of lake trout, you put them in a bag, you put your form in there, you drop them off at the at one of those freezers, and now you're waiting for your check to come. And a couple weeks later, there's a knock at the door, and you think, all right, this is probably the mailman. And you answer the door, and guess what? That's not the mailman, and this isn't a social call. He's there because you probably turned in a bull trout head. Well, I told you about all the forms that you fill out and all the forms you get, you know, how to make money. He has a form too. It looks something like this, and it's usually about 4 or 5 copies. He fills it out with all of your information. You always get the pink copy. And it's an invitation to go see this gentleman here. Not fun. Fortunately, out of the thousands of fish that I've caught, I've yet to turn in a bull trout head. I can usually tell the difference pretty quick. Unfortunately, a lot of people can't. Yesterday, I talked with a gentleman from a Vista. It's a Vista that sponsors and pays for this angler incentive program, and he works in conjunction with Fish and Game. I was just talking to him yesterday about the number of bull trout that are turned in. He says there's still way too many bull trout that are being turned in through the angler incentive program. He said in one day he got a bag that had a rainbow head, a cutthroat head, and a bull trout head, and a lake trout head. So we're going to have a little quiz. Here you thought, God, I just came here for the food, but I got to listen to Pete. Now he's testing us on this stuff. This here is obviously a bull trout. This is a big male about ready to spawn. So what do we have here? Very easy to tell. Lake trout. Some of them are pretty faded out. Sometimes it's tough to tell. The big forked tail. Yep, bull trout. Very faded. You can't see the spotting on it very well, but look at the tail. If you look very, very close, every once in a while you might see a pink spot on it. That's where you get into trouble. You catch one of these, you think, oh, no pink spots, I get to keep it. Well, believe me, those folks there that separate out all these heads, they know the difference. Lake trout, 4 different indicators that that's a lake trout. Deep forked tail, the design goes up into the dorsal fin, the irregular spotting, and I'm back at the dock holding it up. Okay, y'all did pretty good on that. Yes, there are brown trout here, and it seems like I'm catching more and more and more of them. And they're a hard fighting fish. They're actually kind of fun to catch. And I release all rainbows. I do catch a lot of rainbows, not really intentionally. When you fish for these lake trout, you do catch rainbows, and I release all the rainbows. I have no reason to keep a rainbow. They're really not that good of eating. And so to try to keep the population going, I make sure that I release all the rainbow. Brown trout I usually keep because I usually know somebody that will take them and eat them. One of the most important things that I keep on the boat is a hook file. These hooks that come right out of the packages, or you buy hooks, even the Eagle Call laser sharp ones, I don't consider sharp enough. About the only hook that I consider sharp enough that comes out of the package are the Gamakatsus. They're needle sharp. Open up a package and you think those hooks are sharp, they're not sharp enough for me. So I like to take a hook file and touch them up a little bit. You can either get them with the handle or without the handle. The Black Sheep Sporting Goods store, when they went out of business in Lewiston, they were selling these for like $2.50 a piece. They're made by Lure Jensen, and they're about 20 bucks now. So I bought about 12 or 14 of these, and I like them. They're very small. I like the ones with the real fine teeth on them. They're the ones that sharpen them the best. You sharpen your hooks, you just drop it in your pocket, so it's right there all the time. If you misplace them, you're going to find them sooner or later. They're going to turn up in the washing machine. I think every hook file I've owned ended up in the washer. These things will rust really quick. So if you're out using them, you get a little fish slime on them or you get a little moisture on them, make sure you spray them down with WD-40 and keep them dry. Or they rust up, and as soon as they rust up, they just won't sharpen a hook like they should. Anyway, several different companies make these hook files, and I always carry them on the boat. Like I said, These lake trout, they're very soft biters sometimes, and sometimes they'll wrap their mouth around that hook and let go. You have a needle sharp hook and they're not going to let go. They usually hook themselves. I want to talk a little bit about storing these things and transporting them. These lake trout, you just can't throw them into a live well. They die quickly, and the flesh in them deteriorates really quickly. You put them in a live well, they're probably going to be dead in 5 or 10 minutes. You keep them in the live well. By the time you get back to the dock, you start to flay them out, you're going to be flaying out a mushy fish. You've got to keep these things on ice. And what I do is in my cooler, I usually open up a bag of ice, spread it out in the bottom, and then I take half-gallon milk jugs, fill them full of water, and I have those frozen. I'll lay those up on top. There's nothing worse than at the end of the day going back and cleaning your fish and having real mushy and start to fall apart. You got to keep these things cold. So I've showed you a lot of fish that I've caught. Told you about, some of my fishing stories. I like getting on Facebook and seeing everybody else's fishing stories. Caught a bunch of fish, had a pretty good day. You ever see on Facebook anybody say, God, I went out and fished all day long, didn't have a bite, couldn't catch a fish, and came back in? What do you call that when you go out and you don't catch any fish? Being skunked. How many people here have been skunked? You notice I'm raising my hand too? Yes, it happens. I want to get a little bit serious here now and not joke so much. When I'm out on the lake, and I think anybody that's out on the lake, they have necessary equipment. You have to have your life jackets. You have to have your fire extinguisher, your horns, your whistles, and everything else. The number one important item that I think every boat on this lake should have is a VHF radio, without a doubt. You get out in this lake and you get into trouble, that's going to be your lifesaver there. I've had people tell me, but I have a cell phone. Well, the problem with cell phones, first of all, this lake, you don't have real good service. There's a lot of dead spots. You need to ask yourself, okay, my motor's dead, I ran out of gas, battery's dead, I have this cell phone. Who are you going to call? You're going to call your neighbor that, lives 30 miles away to, launch his boat and come get you? Another friend? You could call the sheriff's department. They're not going to come out and give you gas or give you a jump start. More often than not, the sheriff's deputies and marine deputies are not on the lake. And so there you're going to sit with your cell phone and nobody to call, and you're going to be dead in the water. I recommend you get the dash-mounted VHF radios. They transmit on 25 watts. The handhelds are better than nothing, but they only transmit on 2 to 6 watts. When you have a VHF radio, you got to learn how to use it and when to use it. When you turn them on, they automatically default to channel 16. That's your emergency channel. Your emergency channel is for distress and emergency only. And if you need to get a hold of another boater, you can utilize channel 16, but then you got to get off channel 16 and go to an authorized talk around channel, which is usually channel 68, 69, 71, or 72. Please keep the kids off the VHF radios. And please, if you contact another boater, don't sit there and chit-chat back and forth. You'll probably get it in about 3 or 4 sentences and then get a very rude reminder that that's an emergency channel. These are lifesavers. So if you have a VHF radio and you break down and you call for help, next important thing is to know where you're at. A lot of people are out on this lake and they have no clue as to the different landmarks where they're at. You get yourself a Forest Service map. They're $14. They have all the different landmarks, points, coves, everything else on there. A lot of good information on that. Who here has ever unfolded a Forest Service map and then tried to fold it back together? It's worse than trying to fold a fitted sheet, especially if you're out on the boat and the wind is blowing and you're in an emergency situation. But you could always take a picture of it and keep it on your phone. And this one here is just a picture I took with the phone, and sure enough, it has enough detail on it. Have a pretty good idea where you're at.
There's an app called Avenza Maps, and they're actually a Forest Service map that you download on your phone. I have all of them, and they're just phenomenal because the actual map that you can get, it has every detail.
Excellent.
Avenza, A-V-E-N-Z-A. So if you go to the App Store, type in Avenza Maps. So you download the app, and then when you open it, go to that Avenza store, and you can buy any map anywhere that's ever been published. But go type in Idaho Forest Service, and it'll have all Forest Service maps of the state of Idaho.
And they're all downloadable?
Yeah, the download takes just a couple seconds. It downloads to the App Store. They're $4.99. You pay to the App Store.
That's good information. That's what I like about these seminars. We learn from one another. Another map you can get, and this is a pretty colorful one. I've seen these actually put on the wall and, framed, but they too have some great information in them. But I found these at a bookstore here in Sandpoint at 2nd Avenue and Cedar. Yeah, they're a very beautiful map, and like I said, I've seen them hanging on the walls before and framed. Nice maps. But what I recommend are these maps here. They're tear-proof, they're waterproof, they have all the information on them that you need. I'll go ahead and hand one of these out. They're double-sided. It shows the main part of the lake, but then for like the west arm and the river, you turn it over and it shows different parts of the lake. Highly recommend that you get one of those maps. Superfly carries them, $11.99. I went into North 40, theirs were $8.49. Holiday Shores, I went in there just this morning. Go back by the cafe area, they got a whole display of these. Or you can get on Amazon for almost $20 and get one. If you don't know the lake, please carry a map. If you call for help and if you don't know where you're at, it's going to be a long time before somebody comes along and finds you. Who here has the sonar chart plotter combination? This number here is an extremely important number, your GPS location. You give that number to somebody who knows how to operate a GPS or program it in, they could find you within a foot or two. And this is, again, why I say it's important to have it position format set up in degrees and fraction of degrees. It's easy to transmit, it's easy to go ahead and push in and program into your GPS. How many people here on the lake have VHF radios? How many of you, while you're out on the lake, would go out and assist another boater if they needed help? Okay, I didn't take a count. I hope the same number of hands came up. There's your help out there. So if you don't have a VHF radio, everyone that raised your hand is a potential person to come to your assistance. Again, when you're in your position format, that's the reading you want to plug it in for, program it in for degrees and decimal degrees. Another place you can get your GPS reading, who here has a cell phone, a smartphone? Every smartphone has a Maps app on it of one sort or another. Some of you look at your cell phones. Do you have this map app? You open that up and there will be a little blue dot where your location is. You hold your thumb on that blue dot and a screen like this comes up. This top square will give you your location, all of your location information. The bottom square, you could tap on it and actually forward your information to somebody. You could text it to them, you could message it to them, you could email it to them. It will be your actual GPS location. If you tap on the top square, it'll look like this. It says my location. You just barely scroll up on that, and there's your GPS numbers. Those numbers will save your life if you're out lost or if you need help. On Google Maps, it's almost the same way. Hold your thumb on the blue dot, and there's your GPS location right there. I highly recommend that anybody here with a chart plotter knows how to enter those GPS numbers, to create a waypoint and enter those GPS numbers in, because you might be in the position of saving somebody out there. Rescue, in 37 years, I've had to rescue probably, come to the assistance of maybe 3 dozen boats out there. Every one of them had a VHF radio. Now you notice that these GPS numbers, one of them will read just a whole number and a minus number for your latitude and your longitude. Some of them gives it in the north and west. It's easily explained. The way that it's set up is anything above the equator for your latitude is either in a positive number or has a designation of an N. Then you have what's called the prime meridian, and that doesn't mean a good vacation spot. Anything to the east of that is in a whole number. Anything to the west of that is in a minus number. So it could either be this coordinate west or a minus number. When you get in your chart plotter, it's pretty self-explanatory. You can get in there and it'll usually give you the option of how to enter that. So you think, well, how often is this going to be used? Less than 2 weeks ago, I was out on the lake and I hear a faint radio call of somebody needing assistance. It was almost sunset and nobody was answering this gentleman. So I got on the radio and asked him if he still needed assistance. He said affirmative. I said, let's go to channel 9. Went to channel 9. I says, what's your situation? And he said, my motor's dead, my battery's dead. And I said, do you have a trolling motor? He says, no, I don't. Where are you at? And he says, I really don't know. I don't know this lake that well. And he says, I think I'm 4 miles south of the drift yard. That's 4 miles south of the drift yard. I don't have four-wheel drive on my boat, and so I couldn't help him with those locations. I asked him, do you have a chart plotter? He says, yes, I do. I says, get on it, give me the GPS location. He says, it's froze up. He says, the battery's dead. And I says, okay, does somebody have a cell phone? And he says, yes. I says, get on your Maps app, and I talked him through the process, giving me their location. Programmed it into my chart plotter, and that was where he was at in the lake. And now it's almost dark. So I programmed it in, hit go to, and it gave me a straight line to where he was at. Took me maybe 6-7 minutes to find him. When I got to him, now it's sunset and it's almost dark. He said, I says, where did you launch your boat at? He said, the drift yard. Well, I'm all the way at Jeb and Margaret's trailer haven at the mouth of Trussell Creek. So one of the options was tow him to the drift yard, and by the time we got there, it was going to be totally dark. And then I would have had to make it all the way back to the mouth of Trussell Creek, running the boat in the dark. I don't like running this lake in the dark. So what I did is I says, I'll tell you what, I'm going to tow you to Hope. Dropped him off at Hope. I went and I got my pickup, came back to where we docked his boat at, gave him a ride to the drift yard, and then he brought his pickup and trailer back. Had he not had a GPS radio, even a handheld, they would have spent the night in the lake, out on the lake, and it was windy and rainy that night. There was 4 of them in the boat, and they had just like a little bimini top. So please, if there's anything you put in the boat, the next couple $100 you should spend is on a GPS radio. It's interesting, you get on this lake, and if you have a cell phone signal and you dial 911, it may get you the Bonner County Sheriff's Department. It may also get you the Kootenai County Sheriff's Department. You don't know who you're going to get when you dial 911. And they might not be able to help you. What's sad is I don't think that the dispatch center knows how to utilize GPS coordinates to find out where you're at. The Marine deputies do. I've called in coordinates before for hazards or whatever, and they were Johnny on the spot, and they were able to program it right in. Every fisherman here with a chart plotter should learn. It's very easy to learn how to program those numbers in and go to somebody's assistance. So when you go to rescue somebody or somebody comes to rescue you, you're going to need a tow rope. This gentleman that I helped, he didn't have a tow rope. Unfortunately, I had one. You can get different kinds of tow ropes. I've had this one for years from Northwest River Supply. It's called a rescue bag. And it's not only great for towing, but also there's somebody in the water and you need to throw it to them. You hang on to one end, you throw it to them, and the rope just peels out the back of it. If you get a rescue bag, you don't throw it at the person you're trying to rescue, you throw it beyond them, because chances are you're going to hit short. These, $109. You can get cheap ones on Amazon, and they're just that cheap, like 1/4-inch rope. And maybe it'd be good enough to, throw it to somebody to pull them in. It's not good enough for pulling somebody else's boat. Make sure that the rope is strong enough. I carry one in my pickup. I carry one in my boat. And I went ahead and just put this one together here. Bought some rope at North 40 for fairly cheap. Here. Okay.
Want me to pull it?
There you go. Put a hook at one end, and this will just peel right out, tangle free. Maybe $30 total for that bag. The bag was more expensive than the rope. This is that really tough ripstock material. Definitely have a way to tow somebody. You can never have too much rope on the boat, and if you have to tow somebody or be towed, this will make it so you can be towed. Thank you. Something else I carry on my boat. Bob, you may have seen some of these out there. Seen a log floating around? I carry, probably about a dozen of these on my boat. Paint them up nice and pink. I pre-drill them for putting holes in them. Put a little flagging tape on them. And I find a hazard out there, a log. And sometimes these logs are barely visible coming up above the water. The bad ones are the ones that are so waterlogged that they're 20, 30 feet long, and about the top 6 inches are sticking out. Bob, you've seen those out there. So when I find a hazard out there like that, I go ahead and nail one of these on there, and I probably do 15 or 20 of them a year. And Bob, you've probably seen some of my ribbons out there. This one here, I went ahead and put it on a log out there. Probably unnecessary. I mean, that log was the size of a small island. And I think if it was any bigger, Bonner County probably would assess some taxes on it. But the point is that I try to go the extra step, make this lake safe for everybody. Another safety tip. How many here have taken a boat safety course? Okay, about half of you. Not required in Idaho. It is required in Washington. If you're an Idaho resident, boating in Washington, it's not required. But I would wholeheartedly suggest to everybody to take one of these boat safety courses. They're put on by the Coast Guard. They're put on by Idaho and Washington Parks and Recreation. Some of the sheriff's departments will put them on. You can even get online and take your boat safety course. Now, I took mine probably 15, 20 years ago through the Coast Guard at Clarkston, and it was before you could do it online. I think it cost me $10, lasted about 6 hours. Good part was they gave out coffee and donuts. And I learned a little bit, but one thing I did learn is most of the people in that class were clueless about boat safety, about navigation laws. It was pretty pathetic, the lack of knowledge that those people had. And how many times I see out on this lake, people operating their boats like idiots. I'd be willing to bet that just about every one of these wakeboards or ski boats don't have a VHF radio, don't have a tow rope, don't know the navigation laws, don't know the right-of-ways. So I strongly encourage that you take a boat safety course. You could do it online, and when you take it online, you'll get your boat safety card. And if it's one that's approved by the NASBLA, I don't know who came up with that acronym. Anybody know what that acronym means? Didn't think so. I didn't either. You get your boat safety card, and woohoo, I got my boat safety card. You get a discount on your boat insurance if you've taken that course. I did not know that, and until the people at the Coast Guard that was teaching the class, they said, check with your insurance company. I have State Farm insurance, so I called my insurance agent. He's been in the business for 30 years, and I said, do I get a discount on my boat insurance? And he said, I don't know. I'll have to check. He called me back about 15 minutes later and says, guess what? You get a 10% discount, and that's boat, motor, and trailer. I own 3 boats, 5 motors, 3 trailers, and it was a significant savings because I took the boat safety course. So not only do you get to know a little bit about navigation laws and boat safety, you get a discount on your insurance. Progressive, it's 15% off. A lot of people ask me, what do I do with all this fish that I catch? Well, you guys ate some of it tonight. I make that smoked fish cheese spread. I've been making it for about 25 years now. And usually what I'll do is as soon as I get my fish, I fillet it out, vacuum pack it, freeze it, and about a week after Thanksgiving, I pull it all out. And I'll probably smoke up between 200 and 250 pounds of fish just before Christmas. Mix it up with cream cheese. Here's the recipe that I used. There's a copy of the recipe up there on the table if you want to get a copy of that. I give it away to all the businesses that I do business with, friends, family, neighbors, seminars, and all the different agencies and departments that I either work with or work for. I give a lot of that stuff away. This was 1 day out of 3 days we made that stuff. Last year we went through 120 packages of cream cheese. If you need a good recipe, a good brine recipe, this is one I've been using for over 30 years. A lot of ingredients in it. You can take a lot of those ingredients out, but don't skimp on the salt and the sugar. So if you see me out on the lake and I'm kind of going slow in the boat and I got some fishing poles out, and it's a nice day like this, and you think that I'm out there fishing, I'm not really fishing. This is how I do my early Christmas shopping. And for a Christmas idea, I did this here a few years back, bought a tree, didn't have any ornaments to put on it, so I dove into my tackle boxes, pulled out all my steelhead and salmon lures. That's how I decorated my tree. It's kid and cat friendly. Those are all barbless hooks. So if you do stick your kid or your cat, they're easily pulled out. That's all I have, folks. I want to thank you for listening to me, for putting up. I hope you learned something. Get out there. If you go out there and if you get skunked, don't get discouraged. The more time you put in, the better chance you have catching fish. I learned a long time ago that I catch far more fish from the boat than I do from the couch. One last word, I hope to see you out there next year. Please stay safe while you're out on the water. Thank you.